Now, before we start talking about ghosts, spirits, haunted hotels, creepy cemeteries, and things that go bump in the night, let's talk about Alabama for a minute. Alabama became the 22nd state in 1819, and let me tell you, this place has seen some things. We're talking Native American history, Civil War battles, riverboat towns, old plantations, booming industries, devastating tornadoes, and enough strange stories to keep a therapist employed for generations. Alabama helped shape American history in a lot of ways. It played a major role during the Civil Rights Movement, became home to major industries like steel production in Birmingham, and even helped launch humans into space through the work done in Huntsville. That's right. Alabama helped put people on the moon, but somehow we still can't agree on how to properly pronounce pecan. But with all that history comes something else. Ghost stories. Lots of them. You see, whenever people spend hundreds of years living, working, fighting, celebrating, arguing, and occasionally doing things they probably shouldn't have been doing, stories tend to stick around. And in Alabama, some folks believe the people stick around too. From old hotels where guests check in but apparently never check out, to abandoned buildings where footsteps echo through empty hallways, Alabama is packed with legends that have been passed down for generations. Some of these stories are probably just local folklore. Others are explained away as overactive imaginations. And then there are the stories that make you stop and say, okay, that's a little harder to explain. Maybe it's the old Civil War battlefields where soldiers reportedly still march through the darkness. Maybe it's the forgotten cemeteries hidden deep in the woods. Maybe it's the strange lights seen floating over swamps and back roads. Or maybe Alabama's ghosts are just like Alabama football fans, so loyal they refuse to leave no matter what happens. Whatever the reason, one thing is certain. Alabama has earned its place as one of the most haunted states in America. So, grab a flashlight, keep one eye on the shadows, and if you hear something whisper your name from the other side of the room, just remember, it's probably nothing. Probably. This is Screamville, and tonight we're exploring the haunted history of Alabama. Back in 1864, during the Civil War, a Methodist minister named Bill Skeeto became part of one of Alabama's strangest legends. And believe it or not, the most famous part of the story isn't the man, it's a hole in the ground. Bill Skeeto lived near Newton, Alabama, and was accused of helping Union sympathizers. Whether the accusations were true is still debated today, but a local home guard captured him and decided to hang him near the Choctawhatchee River. There was one problem. Bill Skeeto was a tall man. When they placed the noose around his neck and moved the wagon away, his feet still touched the ground. So one of the men grabbed a shovel and dug a hole beneath his feet to make the hanging possible. It was a tragic moment in Alabama history, but according to local legend, that hole refused to stay filled. Over the years, people tossed dirt into it. The dirt disappeared. They filled it with sticks and debris. The hole came back. Some claimed they filled it one day and found it open again the next morning. Others said rain couldn't wash it away and time couldn't erase it. Eventually, the hole became famous throughout Alabama. People traveled from all over just to see it. And because this is the South, where every strange story gets a little stranger with age, many believed Bill Skeeto's spirit was keeping the hole open as a reminder of the injustice done to him. Others claimed the men involved in the hanging suffered bad luck and mysterious deaths afterward. Whether those stories were true or not, nobody could explain why the hole remained for more than a century. Now imagine being the person assigned to fill that hole every year. At some point, you'd probably just quit and tell your boss, "Look, this hole wants to be here more than I want this job." For more than 125 years, the legend lived on. Then, in the late 1900s, construction projects changed the area. A bridge was built nearby, and crews reinforced the riverbank with massive rocks and fill material. For the first time in generations, the famous hole finally disappeared beneath tons of stone. Today, the original hole is gone, but the legend remains. And if you ever find yourself near Newton, Alabama, remember this. Most ghost stories leave behind haunted houses, cemeteries, or old hotels. Bill Skeeto left behind a hole that spent over 100 years, refusing to take a hint. If you grew up anywhere near Tuscaloosa, Alabama, chances are somebody eventually leaned in and said, "You ever heard about Old Bryce?" And if they really wanted to scare you, they'd mention the Jemison Center. Because down in Northport, hidden behind overgrown trees and decades of rumors, sits one of the creepiest abandoned places in Alabama. A place that looks like every horror movie director drove past it and said, "Yep, that's the one." Now first, let's talk history. The original Bryce Hospital opened in 1861 and was considered groundbreaking for its time. It was created to treat people with mental illness in a more humane way than the horrible conditions found in jails and poorhouses back then. The hospital was eventually named after Dr. Peter Bryce, a pioneer in mental health treatment. Over time, though, the facility became overcrowded, and additional buildings and satellite facilities were created to hold more patients. The Jemison Center was built in 1939 on land that had once been part of an old plantation known as Cherokee Place. During segregation, the facility housed African American patients and became part of Alabama's larger mental health system. Patients worked the surrounding farmland, helping the institution feed itself. Officials called it therapy. Critics later called it something a lot closer to free labor. And here's where things start getting dark. By the 1960s and early 1970s, reports began surfacing about terrible conditions inside the facility. Journalists described filthy bathrooms, overcrowding, patients sleeping on floors, and people who appeared heavily medicated and neglected. The stories shocked many Alabamians and helped expose major problems throughout the state's mental health system. The Jemison Center eventually closed in 1977, but unlike a lot of old buildings that get torn down, this one just sat there, empty, rotting, waiting. Trees grew around it, windows shattered, graffiti covered the walls. Nature basically looked at the property and said, "You know what? I'll take it from here." Of course, once a giant abandoned mental institution sits empty for decades, people start telling stories. Lots of stories. Visitors claim they've heard footsteps echoing through empty hallways. Others report hearing voices when nobody else is inside. Some swear doors slam on their own. A few people have even claimed they felt something tug their hair or shove them while exploring the building. Then there are the shadow figures. Every haunted place has shadow figures. It's apparently a requirement. People say they've seen dark shapes standing in doorways or watching from broken windows. Imagine sneaking into an abandoned hospital at midnight, turning your flashlight toward a hallway, and seeing what looks like somebody standing there. Suddenly you're breaking every Olympic sprinting record known to mankind. Today, the Jemison Center remains one of Alabama's most famous abandoned locations. People continue to share ghost stories online, post exploration videos, and debate whether the place is truly haunted. Police also patrol the area, and the building is considered dangerous to enter because of its condition. So if you're tempted to investigate, maybe don't. Because falling through a rotten floor while hunting ghosts is probably the most Alabama way possible to end up becoming part of the haunting yourself. If you've ever driven through Birmingham and looked over at Sloss Furnaces, you probably thought one of two things. Wow, that's an important piece of Alabama history. Or, That looks like where a ghost would clock in for the night shift. Honestly, both answers are probably correct. Sloss Furnaces opened in 1882 during Birmingham's explosive growth as an iron-producing city. Back then, Birmingham wasn't the large city we know today. It was still young and hungry for growth. The area was rich with coal, limestone, and iron ore, which were the three ingredients needed to make iron. Industrialist James Withers Sloss saw an opportunity and built one of the most successful iron-producing operations in the South. Soon, the furnaces were running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The city earned the nickname the Magic City because it seemed to appear almost overnight, and Sloss Furnaces was one of the engines making that magic happen. But there was nothing magical about working there. The heat was absolutely brutal. Workers spent long shifts surrounded by furnaces that reached temperatures of thousands of degrees. Molten iron flowed through channels like rivers of fire. Sparks flew constantly through the air. Men climbed narrow catwalks hundreds of feet above the ground, carrying heavy equipment while surrounded by machinery that could kill them in seconds. Modern workplace safety rules didn't really exist yet. Back then, if a machine looked dangerous, the safety briefing was basically, try not to stand too close to it. As a result, accidents were common. Workers suffered burns, falls, crushing injuries, and explosions. Many never made it home. One of the most famous legends connected to Sloss centers around a foreman named James Slag Wormwood. According to local folklore, Wormwood was known as a ruthless supervisor who demanded impossible production numbers. Workers supposedly feared him almost as much as they feared the furnaces themselves. The story says he pushed men to work harder and faster regardless of the danger. Then one night in the early 1900s, something went terribly wrong. An explosion rocked the furnace area. Wormwood was either burned alive or fatally injured in an accident involving molten iron. Depending on which version of the story you hear, he died instantly or lingered for days before finally passing away. That's when the ghost stories supposedly began. Workers on later shifts claimed they heard an angry voice shouting orders from empty walkways. Men reported hearing someone scream, "Get back to work," even when nobody else was around. Some workers said they felt invisible hands shove them while standing on catwalks. Others claimed tools would move on their own. A few workers reportedly quit after seeing what they described as a burned figure standing near the furnaces before suddenly vanishing into thin air. Imagine showing up for work and your boss is literally a ghost. Human resources isn't prepared for that meeting. The boiler room became one of the most feared locations at Sloss. Employees and security guards reported hearing heavy footsteps echoing through the building late at night. Witnesses claimed they heard metal doors slam when there was no wind. Some reported hearing chains dragging across the concrete floor. Others described hearing the sounds of machinery operating, even though the equipment had been shut down for years. Several visitors have claimed that the temperature suddenly changes in certain areas, becoming noticeably colder despite Alabama's famous ability to make everybody sweat through their shirt. One of the strangest stories involves security guards who worked the property after it closed in 1971. Multiple guards claimed they saw shadowy figures walking between the towering furnace structures. Whenever they attempted to investigate, nobody would be there. Some reported seeing lights moving inside buildings that had no electrical power. Others claimed they heard conversations happening nearby, only to discover they were completely alone. Imagine being assigned the night shift at Sloss. Every noise sounds suspicious. Every shadow looks like somebody watching you. A raccoon could sneeze behind a pipe and you'd immediately start updating your will. Paranormal investigators have visited Sloss for decades, and many believe they've captured strange evidence. Witnesses have reported hearing unexplained voices on recordings. Some claim to have photographed shadow figures standing on catwalks. Others describe hearing workers' names being called from dark corners of the property. Several investigators have even reported feeling sudden nausea, dizziness, or overwhelming sadness while exploring certain areas. Skeptics point out that old industrial sites naturally create strange sounds and eerie conditions. Believers argue that too many people have experienced similar things for it all to be coincidence. Then there are the stories involving visitors. Some claim they've seen a man wearing old-fashioned work clothes staring down from elevated platforms. Others report hearing whistles and metal clanging after sunset. A few visitors have even described hearing what sounds like a full crew of workers talking and moving around, despite the site being completely empty. Some people say they hear footsteps following them, only to turn around and find nobody there. That's the kind of thing that makes you walk a whole lot faster toward the parking lot. What makes Sloss especially creepy is that the place already looks haunted even before you hear the stories. Massive rusted towers rise into the sky. Miles of pipes twist through the property like giant metal snakes. Staircases disappear into shadows. Catwalks stretch overhead. During the day, it looks like a fascinating piece of industrial history. At night, it looks like the final level of a video game where absolutely nothing good is about to happen. Today, Sloss Furnaces is one of Birmingham's most famous landmarks. It hosts tours, concerts, art events, and educational programs. Thousands of people visit every year to learn about the workers who helped build Alabama's industrial economy. Yet despite all the history, most visitors leave talking about the ghosts. Maybe it's the stories of James Wormwood. Maybe it's the reports of voices and shadow figures. Or maybe it's simply the fact that so many people lived, worked, suffered, and died there, that the place feels alive with memories. Whatever the explanation, Sloss Furnaces remains one of Alabama's most legendary haunted locations. Whether you believe the ghosts are real or not, one thing is certain. If there was ever a place where spirits might decide to stick around after clocking out, a giant iron furnace filled with decades of sweat, danger, tragedy, and overtime would be a pretty good candidate. And if the ghost of Slag Wormwood is still there, he's probably still yelling at somebody for taking too long on their lunch break. Maple Hill Cemetery has been watching over Huntsville, Alabama for more than 200 years. Long before Huntsville became known for rockets, NASA, and sending people into space, Maple Hill was already there. The cemetery was established in 1822, making it one of the oldest cemeteries in the entire state. Thousands upon thousands of people have been buried there over the years. Soldiers from multiple wars, governors, doctors, business owners, children, and entire families all found their final resting place on those rolling hills. If cemeteries could talk, Maple Hill would probably need its own podcast series. Walking through Maple Hill during the day is actually pretty peaceful. Massive oak trees stretch over winding roads. Historic tombstones stand everywhere you look. Some graves date back nearly 2 centuries. The cemetery sits on a hillside overlooking parts of Huntsville, giving it a strangely beautiful atmosphere. But tucked away near the edge of the cemetery is the location that gets all the attention. A place with a name so creepy it sounds like something a horror movie writer came up with after drinking too much coffee. That place is the Dead Children's Playground. The playground itself wasn't originally built to be spooky. It was simply a playground placed near the cemetery so local children would have somewhere to play. During the daytime, families brought their kids there just like any other playground. Children climbed on the equipment, swung on the swings, and ran around laughing. Parents sat nearby, keeping an eye on them while trying not to think about the fact they were hanging out beside thousands of graves. Normal Alabama parenting stuff. The legend began sometime during the 20th century. Nobody knows exactly who started it. Like most ghost stories, it seems to have grown little by little until it became part of local folklore. The most common version says that many children who died during the devastating Spanish flu epidemic of 1918 were buried near the area where the playground stands. The flu swept through Alabama like a nightmare. Entire families became sick. Schools closed. Communities suffered tremendous losses. Children were among the victims, and many were laid to rest within Maple Hill Cemetery. As years passed, stories began spreading that the spirits of those children never completely left. According to local legend, after sunset, the playground belonged to them once again. Visitors claimed they saw swings moving on their own despite there being no wind. Others reported hearing laughter echoing through the darkness. Some said they heard children whispering when nobody else was around. Imagine standing beside a cemetery at midnight and hearing a kid giggle behind you. That's the kind of thing that makes your soul start packing its bags. The playground soon became one of Huntsville's most famous local legends. Teenagers especially loved it. Every generation of teenagers seems to have the exact same thought process. I know there's a creepy cemetery nearby with ghost stories. Let's go there at midnight and see what happens. So carloads of nervous teenagers would pull up after dark, armed with flashlights, cheap cameras, and way more confidence than common sense. Some stayed only a few minutes before running back to their cars. Others spent hours trying to catch evidence of the supernatural. Many visitors reported strange experiences. Some claimed they saw small, shadowy figures moving between the trees. Others reported cold spots during hot Alabama summer nights. There were stories of swings suddenly beginning to move when the entire playground had been perfectly still moments before. Paranormal investigators even brought recording equipment hoping to capture mysterious voices. Whether the evidence was real or not depended entirely on who you asked. Believers called it proof. Skeptics called it wind. Alabama mosquitoes called it dinner. One reason the legends became so powerful is because Maple Hill already has an eerie atmosphere after dark. During the day, the cemetery feels historic. At night, it feels entirely different. Moonlight reflects off old marble tombstones. Fog occasionally settles among the graves. The trees cast long shadows that seem to move when you aren't looking directly at them. Every little noise suddenly sounds important. A squirrel becomes a ghost. A bird becomes a demon. A falling acorn becomes the beginning of your obituary. Over the years, more stories attach themselves to the playground. Some locals claim they saw glowing orbs floating between the graves. Others described hearing children's voices calling their names. There were even reports from people who said they felt someone tug on their clothing when nobody was nearby. Of course, legends have a way of growing bigger over time. If 10 people tell the same ghost story for 50 years, eventually the ghost ends up with a driver's license and a checking account. The cemetery itself also has plenty of real history that adds to the mystery. Maple Hill contains graves dating back to some of the earliest days of Alabama statehood. Veterans from the Civil War rest there. Entire generations of Huntsville residents are buried within its grounds. The cemetery has witnessed epidemics, wars, economic depressions, and enormous changes in the city around it. Every grave represents a life story, and when you realize just how many stories are buried there, it's easy to understand why people's imaginations start working overtime. In 2007, the original playground was removed during cemetery expansion projects. For a brief moment, it looked like the famous playground might disappear forever. But the legend had become too popular. Residents wanted the playground preserved, so a new playground was eventually built nearby. Apparently, even ghost stories have fan clubs. The legend survived, and people continued making late-night visits, hoping to experience something strange. Today, the Dead Children's Playground remains one of Alabama's most famous haunted locations. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, there's no denying the place has a unique reputation. Some visitors leave convinced they experienced something paranormal. Others leave disappointed because the only thing they encountered was a mosquito the size of a helicopter. But nearly everyone leaves with a story. So is the dead children's playground actually haunted? Nobody knows for sure. Maybe the swings really do move by themselves. Maybe children really do laugh in the darkness. Or maybe it's simply an old cemetery filled with history, surrounded by decades of legends, where people's imaginations take over after the sun goes down. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. If somebody invites you to visit a place called the Dead Children's Playground at midnight, and your first response is, "Sure, sounds fun," you may be exactly the kind of person ghost stories were invented for. The Drish House in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, is one of those places that looks like it should come with its own spooky soundtrack. Sitting on a hill with its towering columns and massive three-story tower, it has been turning heads since the 1830s. Even before you hear a single ghost story, the place already looks like the kind of house where something strange might happen. You know the type. The kind of house where you expect a raven to land on the roof. The mansion was built in 1837 by Dr. John R. Drish, a wealthy physician who wanted a home that would show off his success. And show off it did. The house was one of the grandest homes in the area and became a symbol of wealth and status in Tuscaloosa. Drish eventually added a large tower to the structure, probably because having a giant mansion wasn't enough. Apparently, he looked at the house and thought, "You know what this place needs? A giant tower that will someday become the center of ghost stories." For years, the Drish family enjoyed a comfortable life in the mansion. But history has a habit of ruining perfectly good stories. The Civil War brought financial hardships to many Southern families, and the Drish family was no exception. As the years went by, Dr. Drish reportedly struggled with alcohol and declining fortunes. Then tragedy struck in 1867 when he suffered a fatal fall. Exactly how the accident happened depends on who is telling the story. Some say he fell downstairs. Others claim he fell from a balcony. Regardless of the details, the accident ended his life and began the mansion's journey toward becoming one of Alabama's most famous haunted locations. Dr. Drish's wife, Sarah, was devastated by the loss of her husband. She organized an elaborate funeral and placed candles throughout the tower room while his body lay in state. After the funeral, she carefully stored the candles away. Sarah became obsessed with the idea that those same candles would be used during her own funeral someday. Most people leave behind recipes, jewelry, or family heirlooms. Sarah apparently left behind a very specific candle-related request. Years later, when Sarah passed away, nobody could find the candles. Despite searching everywhere, the family never located them. Her final wish could not be fulfilled. Not long afterward, strange reports began circulating around Tuscaloosa. People claimed they could see bright flames flickering inside the tower. From a distance, it looked as if the mansion was on fire. Neighbors would panic and rush to alert authorities. But whenever anyone arrived to investigate, there was no fire, no smoke, no damage, nothing. The tower would simply be sitting there, as if it hadn't just scared half the town into cardio. These mysterious lights became known as the death lights of the Drish House. Some locals believed Sarah's spirit was lighting the missing funeral candles herself. Others thought the lights were a warning of death or tragedy. Skeptics argued that the lights could be reflections, atmospheric conditions, or tricks of the eye. Of course, ghost stories tend to be much more popular than discussions about unusual light refraction. Nobody gathers around a campfire asking to hear the terrifying tale of reflected moonlight. As the decades passed, the mansion changed hands many times. It served as a school, a church, and even a warehouse. through all those changes, stories of paranormal activity continued. Visitors reported hearing footsteps in empty hallways. Others claimed they heard voices when nobody else was around. Some described doors opening and closing by themselves, while others experienced sudden cold spots that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Ghost hunters would probably call these signs of paranormal activity. Most normal people would call them excellent reasons to leave. One of the most common sightings involves a woman believed to be Sarah Drish. Witnesses have reported seeing her standing near windows or wandering through parts of the mansion. Some say she appears calm and peaceful. Others claim she looks as though she is searching for something. Considering the whole candle situation, that would make sense. Somewhere in the afterlife, Sarah may still be thinking, "I know I put those things somewhere." Paranormal investigators who have visited the house over the years have also reported strange noises, unexplained shadows, and odd equipment malfunctions. Cameras stop working, batteries drain unexpectedly, recording devices capture sounds that nobody remembers hearing. Whether these experiences are supernatural or not remains a matter of debate. What isn't debated is that the house has an atmosphere that can make even the bravest visitor glance over their shoulder a few times. Today, the Drish House remains one of Tuscaloosa's most recognizable historic landmarks. Its beautiful architecture attracts history lovers, while its ghost stories attract thrill seekers looking for a good scare. The mansion stands as a reminder of Alabama's past, filled with both real history and generations of local legends. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, there's no denying that the Drish House has earned its reputation. And if you ever happen to see mysterious flames glowing in the tower late at night, you can do what generations of locals have done before you. Stare in amazement for about 3 seconds and then run like your gym membership depends on it. The story of the Highway 5 ghost near Lynn, Alabama, is one of those legends that has been passed around for generations. Like most good Southern ghost stories, there are about 12 different versions, 17 people who swear they saw it themselves, and one uncle who claims he punched the ghost and won. The legend centers around a lonely stretch of Highway 5 in rural northwest Alabama near the small town of Lynn. According to local folklore, a young woman was killed there decades ago. Most versions say she was struck by a truck while walking along the road at night. Some say she had been arguing with her boyfriend. Others say she was trying to get home after her car broke down. The details change depending on who's telling the story, but the ending is always the same. She died on that stretch of highway, and apparently she never really left. For years, drivers traveling the road late at night have reported seeing a woman dressed in white standing beside the highway. Sometimes she's seen walking along the shoulder. Sometimes she's standing completely still, staring toward the road. The creepiest reports claim she suddenly appears in front of moving vehicles before vanishing into thin air. Nothing wakes you up faster than thinking you've hit somebody, only to discover you've actually run over absolutely nothing. Imagine explaining that to your insurance company. "Sir, what caused the accident?" "A ghost." "A what?" "A ghost in a dress." "Sir, we're going to need you to step out of the vehicle." Many drivers claim strange things happen when they reach the area where the woman supposedly died. Headlights flicker, radios fill with static, engines sputter, cell phone signals drop. Of course, some skeptics point out that old roads, old vehicles, and Alabama humidity can cause all kinds of weird electrical problems. But ghost believers aren't buying it. They'll tell you the spirit is trying to get attention. Maybe she's trying to warn people. Maybe she's looking for help. Or maybe she's simply reminding everyone that wandering down a dark Alabama highway at 2 a.m. is a terrible life decision. Some witnesses have reported seeing her in their rearview mirrors after passing the area. Others claim she appears briefly in the back seat. Now that's a level of customer service nobody asked for. If I look in my mirror and suddenly see a ghost sitting behind me, I'm not stopping to investigate. That car is becoming an airplane. The legend spread throughout Winston County and surrounding areas over the years. Teenagers started making midnight trips to the road hoping to spot the ghost. This is a tradition as old as ghost stories themselves. Every generation of teenagers hears there's a haunted road nearby and immediately says, "That sounds safe." Because apparently sitting at home watching television is just too boring. Local residents often tell stories of hearing unexplained cries near the highway. Some describe hearing a woman calling for help. Others hear sobbing coming from the woods. The problem is that the area is full of wildlife, and Alabama has some animals that make noises straight out of a horror movie. A fox screaming in the middle of the night sounds like somebody is being chased by demons. Still, people who know the legend swear what they've heard wasn't an animal. One reason the story has survived for so long is because Highway 5 itself feels like the perfect setting for a ghost tale. Long stretches of road cut through forests and rural countryside. At night, the darkness can seem endless. There aren't bright city lights everywhere. There aren't crowds of people. It's just you, your vehicle, and whatever your imagination decides is standing between the trees, which is exactly why every shadow starts looking suspicious. That old mailbox, ghost. Tree stump, ghost. Plastic grocery bag blowing across the road, definitely ghost. The Highway 5 ghost has become one of Alabama's most famous roadside legends. Whether there's any truth behind it is impossible to know. No one has ever captured definitive proof, and the original tragedy has become tangled in decades of retellings. But that's how folklore works. A real event, a mysterious death, and a few strange experiences eventually grow into a legend that refuses to die. Today, people still drive that stretch of Highway 5, hoping for a glimpse of the woman in white. Most leave without seeing anything unusual. Some leave convinced they've witnessed something supernatural. And a few probably leave after discovering that the ghost they saw was actually a deer standing in the road judging their driving skills. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. If you're driving Highway 5 after midnight and see a woman standing beside the road, your brain is going to remember the legend long before logic has a chance to show up. And that's exactly why ghost stories survive. They don't have to be real to make your heart skip a beat when you're alone on a dark Alabama highway. Back in the late 1800s, the small town of Carrollton, Alabama, found itself at the center of one of the strangest legends in the South. It all revolves around a mysterious face that appears in a window of the old Pickens County Courthouse. The face has been visible for generations, and to this day people still stop, stare, and wonder if Alabama's most famous ghost forgot to check out. The story usually begins with a man named Henry Wells. According to local legend, Wells was accused of setting fire to the courthouse. Now, burning down a courthouse is generally considered a bad career move, especially in a small town where everybody knows everybody and gossip travels faster than modern Wi-Fi. The townspeople were furious and wanted someone to blame. Legend says Wells was captured and brought back to Carrollton. While being held in the courthouse, he looked out of an upstairs window and insisted he was innocent. Some versions say he begged for mercy. Others say he swore he had been falsely accused. Either way, the crowd outside wasn't exactly in a listening mood. Then the story gets weird. According to the legend, a violent storm rolled through town. Lightning flashed across the sky, thunder shook the courthouse, and somehow Wells was killed during the chaos. When everything settled down, people noticed what appeared to be his face staring out from the glass. Not a crack, not a stain, a face. And once people saw it, they couldn't unsee it. The strangest part was that the image wouldn't go away. Over the years, people tried cleaning the window. They scrubbed it. They polished it. They probably rubbed it so much the glass thought it was being punished for something. But no matter what they did, the face remained. As the years passed, the story spread throughout Alabama. Visitors traveled to Carrollton just to see the famous window. Some people swore the face looked sad, others thought it looked angry. A few probably stared at it for 10 minutes and then nodded like they understood exactly what the ghost was trying to say. Ghosts, however, are notoriously bad at communication. Of course, historians eventually started poking holes in the legend. Records suggest parts of the story may have been exaggerated over time. Some details don't line up perfectly. There are even questions about whether the window was installed after Wells had already died, which would create a pretty serious problem for the theory that his face was burned into the glass. But that hasn't stopped the legend from growing. In fact, the mystery may be what keeps it alive. Nobody has ever fully explained why the image looks so much like a human face. Some people think it's a natural chemical reaction in the old glass. Others believe weather and age created the pattern. And then there are those who look at it and say, "That's a ghost, and I'm not sticking around long enough to argue with him." Today, the old courthouse remains one of Alabama's most famous haunted landmarks. Tourists, ghost hunters, history buffs, and curious travelers all come to see the face for themselves. Some leave convinced they've witnessed something paranormal. Others leave convinced that old glass can play tricks on your eyes. And a few leave wondering why the ghost chose a courthouse window instead of somewhere more comfortable, like a beach resort. Whatever the truth may be, the face in the window has become a permanent part of Alabama folklore. Whether it's the spirit of Henry Wells, a strange quirk of nature, or the world's oldest accidental selfie, one thing is certain. For nearly 150 years, that face has been staring out at visitors, silently reminding everyone that some mysteries refuse to disappear. And honestly, if I were a ghost, haunting a courthouse window for over a century sounds exhausting. I'd at least ask for a rocking chair. Fort Morgan sits at the very end of Mobile Bay in Alabama, where the bay meets the Gulf of Mexico. Today it's a popular historic site, but this old brick fortress has seen enough battles, disasters, and strange events to fill several history books and probably a few ghost story collections too. Construction on Fort Morgan began in 1819 and wasn't completed until 1834. Apparently, even back then, government construction projects moved at a pace that could make a turtle impatient. The fort was built to protect Mobile Bay after the War of 1812 taught America that having enemy ships sail into your harbor was generally not ideal. Once completed, the massive brick fortress became one of the strongest coastal defenses in the United States. For years, soldiers lived within the fort's thick walls. They trained, stood watch, cleaned weapons, complained about Alabama heat, and probably spent a lot of time wishing somebody would invent air conditioning a century earlier. The fort became an important military post, and thousands of soldiers passed through its gates over the decades. The fort became famous during the Civil War. In 1861, Confederate forces took control of Fort Morgan and used it to defend Mobile Bay. Then in August of 1864, one of the most important naval battles of the Civil War took place right outside its walls. The Battle of Mobile Bay saw Union forces attack the harbor while Fort Morgan fired on them from shore. The fort endured weeks of bombardment before finally surrendering. By the end of the battle, portions of the fort had been heavily damaged, and many soldiers had been killed or wounded. After the Civil War, Fort Morgan continued serving the military through the Spanish-American War, World War I, and World War II. Over the years, countless soldiers were stationed there. Some came and went. Others died from accidents, illness, or wartime incidents. When a place has witnessed more than a century of military service and suffering, people naturally begin wondering whether some former residents never truly left. One of the most famous ghost stories involves the old barracks. In 1917, a military prisoner reportedly hanged himself there. Since then, visitors and staff have claimed to hear strange crying sounds late at night. Others report hearing footsteps when nobody is present. Some say they've heard doors slam or unexplained noises echo through empty rooms. Imagine being alone inside a dark brick fort and hearing somebody crying down the hallway. That's the kind of moment where suddenly your bravery develops a flat tire. Many visitors also report a feeling of being watched in the barracks. Paranormal investigators have claimed to capture strange sounds and unexplained voices during overnight investigations. Whether these are actual ghosts or just the fort settling after more than a century of existence depends entirely on who you ask. Ghost hunters usually vote for ghosts. Historians usually vote for old buildings. The ghosts have yet to release an official statement. Another legend centers around a mysterious woman said to haunt the grounds. According to local stories, a woman was dragged into the fort during the late 19th century and beaten to death by attackers who were never identified. Her murder was supposedly never solved. Visitors claim they occasionally see a female figure wandering through the fort or near the walls after dark. Witnesses describe her appearing for only a moment before vanishing. According to the legend, she continues searching for justice more than a century later. Other reports involve shadowy figures moving through tunnels and corridors. Some visitors claim they've heard soldiers marching where no living soldiers were present. Others report hearing distant cannon fire or voices carrying through empty sections of the fort. Employees who have worked there after dark often tell stories about hearing footsteps behind them, only to turn around and find nobody there. Part of what makes Fort Morgan so creepy is the fort itself. The thick brick walls create strange echoes. The underground passages are dark and narrow. Long hallways stretch into shadows. Even during the daytime, some areas feel like they belong in a horror movie. At night, with the wind coming off Mobile Bay and moonlight shining through old openings in the walls, it's easy to understand why imaginations start working overtime. Today, Fort Morgan remains one of Alabama's most fascinating historic landmarks. Visitors come to learn about the Civil War, explore military history, and enjoy beautiful views of the Gulf Coast. Others arrive carrying cameras, EMF detectors, and enough ghost hunting equipment to make the military engineers who built the fort very confused. Whether you believe the stories or not, there's no denying that Fort Morgan has earned its haunted reputation. Between the battles, the tragedies, the prisoner who died in the barracks, and the mysterious woman said to wander the grounds, the fort has accumulated more ghost stories than most places could handle. And if you ever visit after dark and hear somebody crying in an empty hallway, just remember, running away at full speed is technically a form of historical appreciation. Sweetwater Mansion in Florence, Alabama, is one of those places that looks beautiful during the day and then suddenly looks like a terrible life decision after dark. The mansion's story began in the late 1820s when General John Brahan, a veteran of the War of 1812, decided he wanted a home that would make everyone in town say, well, somebody's doing pretty good. Construction started, but unfortunately Brahan passed away before it was completed. His son-in-law, Robert M. Patton, stepped in and finished the mansion in 1835. Patton would later become governor of Alabama, which means Sweetwater wasn't just a fancy house. It was basically the VIP section of North Alabama. The mansion sat on a large plantation overlooking the Tennessee River and quickly became one of the grandest homes in the region. The place witnessed decades of Alabama history, including political gatherings, family celebrations, and enough drama to fill several seasons of a reality television show. Then came the Civil War. Like many large Southern homes, Sweetwater found itself caught in the middle of the conflict. Soldiers passed through the area, military officers occupied parts of the property, and the mansion reportedly served various wartime purposes during the years of fighting. Considering the number of wounded soldiers, grieving families, and tragic losses connected to the war, it's not surprising that some people believe the mansion never completely let go of its past, and that's where things start getting weird. One of the most famous ghost stories involves a caretaker who supposedly walked downstairs one day and discovered a casket sitting inside the mansion. According to the story, a Confederate soldier lay inside. The problem? Nobody had brought a casket into the house. The apparition vanished as mysteriously as it appeared. Imagine showing up to work expecting to sweep the floors and suddenly finding a ghost funeral in progress. That's the kind of thing that makes you immediately update your resume. Visitors over the years have reported seeing shadowy figures moving through hallways and rooms. Some have claimed to catch glimpses of people dressed in old-fashioned clothing who disappear when approached. Others have seen strange lights floating through windows or moving across rooms where no one should be. Then there are the footsteps. Lots and lots of footsteps. People have reported hearing someone walking upstairs when the building was completely empty. Others have heard footsteps behind them, only to turn around and discover nobody was there. That's always comforting. Nothing says historic mansion quite like hearing invisible people exercising overhead. Some visitors have also reported hearing whispers, faint voices, and even the sound of children laughing. Now, hearing laughter in a playground is normal. Hearing laughter in an empty mansion at night is how every horror movie starts. One of the spirits most commonly associated with Sweetwater is believed to be Jane Patton, whose son died during the Civil War. Local legends say she was devastated by the loss and that her sorrow never truly left the mansion. Visitors have reported feeling overwhelming sadness in certain rooms, as if the emotions from long ago somehow remain trapped within the walls. Paranormal investigators have spent years examining the mansion, hoping to capture evidence of the unexplained. Some claim to have recorded strange voices. Others have photographed mysterious figures or unexplained lights. Whether these are genuine hauntings or simply the result of an old house settling is still up for debate. Today, Sweetwater Mansion remains one of Alabama's most famous haunted locations. Some visitors come for the history, some come for the architecture, and some come hoping a ghost will photobomb their vacation pictures. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. If you decide to visit Sweetwater Mansion after dark and hear footsteps coming down the hallway toward you, don't panic. It could be a ghost. It could be an old floorboard. Or it could be your common sense finally showing up and telling you it was a bad idea to wander through a haunted mansion at midnight. If there is one thing the little town of Abbeville, Alabama, is famous for besides Southern hospitality, it's a ghost who apparently never learned the concept of personal space. Her name is Huggin' Molly, and for more than a century, she has been one of Alabama's strangest legends. Unlike most ghosts that haunt old houses, rattle chains, or stand around looking spooky in cemeteries, Huggin' Molly had a completely different approach to terror. She preferred cardio. According to local legend, Huggin' Molly was an enormous woman dressed in white who wandered the streets late at night. Witnesses described her as being somewhere between 7 and 8 feet tall. Now that's already a problem. When somebody is taller than an NBA center and roaming the streets after midnight, most people are going to have questions. The story goes that if children stayed out too late, Huggin' Molly would suddenly appear from the shadows. She wouldn't ask how their day was going. She wouldn't offer life advice. She would run toward them at full speed, grab them in a giant bear hug, and then let out an ear-piercing scream directly into their ears before disappearing into the darkness. Imagine trying to explain that to your parents. "Why are you home early tonight?" "Well, Mom, a giant screaming woman hugged me so hard I saw my ancestors." Needless to say, most kids didn't stay out very late. Nobody knows exactly where the legend began. Some people believe it started in the early 1900s as a way to keep children from wandering the streets after dark. Before video games, cell phones, and streaming services, kids often stayed outside until late in the evening. Parents needed a way to get them home. Apparently, somebody decided that creating a 7-foot-tall screaming hug monster was the solution. And honestly, it worked. Over the years, countless people claim they either saw Huggin' Molly or knew someone who did. The stories were always similar. A large woman dressed in white would appear suddenly, chase someone down, hug them, scream, and vanish. Nobody ever reported being hurt. Traumatized, sure. Embarrassed, probably. But injured, not really. That's one reason the legend has survived so long. Unlike many ghost stories, Huggin' Molly wasn't evil. She was more like the world's most aggressive grandmother. Instead of handing out cookies, she handed out panic attacks. As the years passed, the legend became a major part of the town's identity. While other towns were known for famous battles, historic buildings, or important people, Abbeville became known for a ghost whose main hobby was surprise hugging. Eventually, the town decided to embrace the story instead of running from it. That's when one of the town's most famous restaurants entered the picture. A local businessman who grew up hearing the legend decided to name his restaurant Huggin' Molly's. It was a way to celebrate one of the town's most unique pieces of folklore. Thankfully, the restaurant version of Huggin' Molly is much friendlier than the original. Today, people visit Huggin' Molly's for burgers, sandwiches, milkshakes, ice cream, and Southern comfort food. Instead of being chased down the street by a giant woman, customers are greeted with good food and friendly service. Honestly, that's probably the better business model. The restaurant has become a destination for both locals and travelers. People stop by not only for the food, but also because they want to hear the story behind the name. Before long, they're learning about the giant ghostly woman who spent her nights sprinting after children like a paranormal linebacker. Today, Huggin' Molly remains one of Alabama's most beloved legends. Whether she was a real person, a ghost, a town prank, or simply a story parents used to keep kids out of trouble, nobody knows for sure. But one thing is certain. If you're walking through the little town late at night and hear heavy footsteps behind you, don't panic. It might just be somebody heading to Huggin' Molly's for a milkshake. Then again, if a giant woman suddenly wraps you in a bear hug and screams loud enough to make your ears file a noise complaint, you'll know the legend is still alive and well. And at that point, you might need more than a milkshake. You might need therapy. Well, that's going to do it for our journey through the haunted history of Alabama. From haunted mansions and ghostly hotels to creepy cemeteries and mysterious back roads, we've explored some of the strangest stories the heart of Dixie has to offer. Whether you believe every ghost story or think every haunting can be explained by bad wiring and too much sweet tea, one thing is certain: Alabama has no shortage of history. And honestly, with the amount of football arguments in this state, some of these ghosts are probably still hanging around trying to settle the Alabama versus Auburn debate. Can you imagine spending 100 years trapped in a haunted house only to hear "Roll Tide" coming from one room and "War Eagle" coming from another? At that point, I'd haunt somebody too. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join us here on Screamville as we travel across America and around the world, searching for the creepiest places, the strangest legends, and the most haunted locations history has to offer. We've got a lot more spooky adventures ahead, and trust me, Some of the places we're visiting next make Alabama's ghosts look like they're working part-time. Speaking of that, pack your bags, grab your flashlight, and maybe bring an extra pair of underwear because our next stop is Ohio, home to haunted prisons, ghostly tunnels, abandoned hospitals, and enough paranormal stories to keep a ghost hunter awake at night. Until next time, keep your eyes open, keep your lights on, and remember, if you hear footsteps behind you in an empty hallway, don't worry. It's probably just an Alabama fan looking for an Auburn fan, or an Auburn fan looking for an Alabama fan. Honestly, that's even scarier. Thanks for watching Screamville, and we'll see you in Ohio.